everyone, and welcome to another amazing episode of Culture in Maine, York's weekly cultural showcase. We have a very special episode for you this week. It's a tribute to jazz and the jazz culture, which is surprisingly strong in the York area. Now, April is Jazz Appreciation Month officially, according to Mayor Bracey in York. So we have some jazz musicians that are going to knock your socks off this week. In fact, we have jazz saxophonist Chris Bacchus. We have jazz bassist Steve Mishi. We actually have jazz art by Peter Danko. And we have some excerpts from Jeff Sting Luther Kers, which is held at the First Presbyterian Church downtown every year for an audience of more than 500 people. It's an incredible show and it is packed, but you get it right here in your home. So sit back, relax, and even if you're not a fan of jazz, I guarantee you, by the end of this episode, you will be.
Culture in Maine. It is a place where the truth should be kept.
The arts and music scene really shows what people are about.
Share what's going on here in York.
Makes you feel like a family.
Local art has a face that most people can relate.
Our community up here that sticks together.
Art is art.
Great potential. Great artists, poets, singers, writers, directors, filmmakers. It's fantastic. Everyone has a story to tell.
That moment, you have to capture that moment and share it with the rest of the world.
Showing something that maybe is not been seen before.
Without art, it's like
I am art. I've been art ever since I was born.
It really adds a great deal to our community.
we don't really need art to exist, but you need art to live.
Culture in Maine is important. I think playing it out is important. And playing the mics and playing wherever you can play. It's all about us all checking in with each other.
I've brought one of my very favorite saxophonists and jazz musicians and just all around a pretty cool guy who is a real hometown boy done good, and here to share a little bit of his story with us, the incredible Chris Bacchus. So welcome to the corner of Culture in Maine, little tiny York's hometown showcase. Came all the way back home from big bad Brooklyn. How does it feel to be coming back home? You don't get back that often, no?
No. Whenever I come back, it's either family or work or both. So I like being home, and of course I love seeing my family. And my wife is from here, and her family. A lot of good people, and it's always good. Sometimes it's bittersweet in certain ways.
Why?
Well, you know, even something as simple as one day I should maybe throw some autobiography in this. I lived my family for 10 years on Duke Street between Cottage Place and Jackson. It's the 700 block of South Duke.
I know the block.
And I remember that block, I was there, say, between about 3 and 14. And I remember the street, I remember Duke Street seeming really wide, and there was a place across the street from me that was at that time was a convent, and there were nuns in there, there were sisters in there.
Oh, wow.
And it was a big yard, it was a nice yard, we used to go play there. Sometimes they kicked us out, sometimes they'd come out and be really sweet to us. It just, I don't know if it depended on them or how rambunctious we were.
Which nun you got that
Yeah,
day.
right. But I remember just looking at that street and seeing how really small it was, and the idea that you could park a car there and the cars would drive by, thinking as a person who drives an automobile now for many years, I'm looking, man, this street is like, it's like an alley. It's an alley.
Yeah.
This was a street that I thought long and hard about crossing, and then ran like hell anyway, you know. And I just that was a bittersweet feeling. Like it seemed so big then, and it's not that big.
Now you're a lot bigger.
Yeah, marginally.
So now talk to me about your family, because you are not the only musical person that has come out of your family.
Yeah. No, there's nobody plays any music. My father is a music listener all his life. Okay. That's what he is. He doesn't play an instrument, but he's sincere appreciation and really deep knowledge particularly about jazz, and that's what made it kind of easy for me to learn things. Is that there was a library there, okay, you know, of recordings, and he was very encouraging. And my mother actually has musical skill as far as being able, you know, singing and stuff, but you know, she wouldn't show it anywhere. She's not part of any kind of performing groups or any kind of groups. My brother's a listener and lover of music. But I think the thing in my family is the creative things and words, you know, because my father wrote and has also a huge library of books and is always reading and always thinking, my mother as well. So that was kind of an aspect of my development. And also my mother studied at the Pine Street Center, very close to here. She studied pottery. And when I grew up, we had a kick wheel, we had a kiln, we had a couple of portable electric wheels, and we had a big can with about 100, 150 pounds of clay in it, and glazes.
Standard that everybody keeps in their house.
And we had it in this unheated back room of our house on Duke Street. And you know, my mother had a studio, and she made work, and she really made some incredible things. And she had a circle of friends who were artisans, and they were very skilled people. We were on a little bit of a circuit with craft shows. And as a result, we also got onto a circuit with one of the crafts people that she worked with, who really was an extraordinary woman. Her husband played mandolin with Del McCurry, who was like a bluegrass icon. And
so you were this close to becoming a bluegrass musician?
I don't think so. I just I remember when we went to their house, and they lived in Broadbecks, and we went to their house. There was a room where Dick Staber kept all his like junky instruments. So like, yeah, you know, that's a slack key guitar, but I'm never really going to play that. But I'm going to keep it in there. You know, an old mandolin, and you know, a dobro with 2 strings broken, and you know, a guitar. You know, now that he has a Martin, he didn't need this old. But so anyway, there's all these instruments. And I remember when we went there, I would just hole up in that room and diddle around with those instruments forever. And I never really tired of that.
So what drew you to making music? I mean, there was all these things surrounding you, all these things that you could have gotten lost in or captivated by, but for some reason the instruments kept pulling you.
Yeah, I was a solitary kid. I was a shy kid, kind of a flabby kid. Wasn't really super physical, running around with my friends. And I like to read a lot, so when I found out you could be alone with the instrument and get things out of it, that was a powerful draw. And when I would go to people's houses, I would either, you know, pillage their record collections or their library, you know, whatever books were there. And then if there was a piano, you couldn't really get me away from that thing. And I had learned tunes, you know. I didn't really know notation, and then I got a guitar at one point that was like a cheapy guitar that came with this instruction book.
Oh yeah.
And I couldn't figure the instrument out physically. Like it just frustrated me to no end. And I could play things on it, but
it never felt like home.
No, and I don't think I really was that committed to it. But then for some reason, the band instrument thing, and I should say because I'm in New York, I should say I went to Jackson Elementary, of course, because of where I lived. and they brought the instruments, and I picked out the saxophone. Of course, I got encouragement from my father, and they got a tenor saxophone, kind of a big instrument for a kid my size. And for whatever reasons, my lessons were delayed for some period of time, but I had a method book, and I had the instrument. And I put it together as best as I could, and I started to play it. And the book made sense to me, and the notation up to a point. So in a matter of a short amount of time, I was playing a whole lot of stuff, a lot of weird sounding stuff, but I had figured out a lot of things. You know, I'd made some really key mistakes in terms of how I assembled the instrument, which limited my tone production severely.
That'll happen.
Which got straightened out with a laugh by my first teacher, who I should say his name was Holmes Royer. And I'm forever in his debt, and I'm really forever in New York City Schools debt, that there was a program where I could just walk in as a kid of whatever means we had and be a part of a, you know, get lessons in a school and then play with other kids my age. And fantastic, but I took to that instrument right away. Like I found a lot of music in it immediately. I found things to do. I went to a music school and I never finished, but it was good for me socially, and it was good for my work, because I left there and immediately began to work more after I left, because there was already a network of people.
So socially it was beneficial for you because it was a way to make connections and
Yes.
meet people in the industry.
Although I didn't know that at the time. I mean, I was just a bummed out, depressed kid. But it was helpful, and that, you know, sort of that spurred, sort of one gig led to the next, led to, you know, a closed door, led to something else, led to, you know, time here and there. And then I was in Washington for 10 years. And that was really good, because that was like a real blossoming. Creatively, really some extraordinary musicians there. And I got to be a part of some long running groups with my peers. And I was a part of a repertory big band that was a lot of fun.
Big band, that's
played,
fun music.
Yeah, well, I played in a lot of big bands, which is sort of probably the reason that I got in there. But that was really helpful. And the contact with the people who conducted and organized that band was good for me professionally and musically. And then, but you know, I had always been in New York for various periods of time. And when I was on the road, the usual routine was that when a tour ended, or there was any kind of hiatus, even 3 or 4 or 5 days, you'd end up in New York. Your flight went to New York. More often than not, the bus went to New York, and it went to Times Square. You know, it went to West 46th Street, and you got dropped there.
Figure it out.
You got the paymaster. You got paid on the bus. You know, you got a fistful of cash, and then you got dropped off. And I don't know when you went to Columbia, but you know, Times Square in 1984, 85, 86.
Very different than the Disneyfied version that we experience now.
Let's
put it that way.
It was more than a little dicey.
Yes.
So getting dropped off and having in my pocket $800, $1,000, $1,200, $1,500
Danger,
cash.
Will Robinson. Danger.
A saxophone and a suitcase filled with dirty clothes. You know, that wow. I tell my wife, who's really an extraordinary person and patient and loving in superhuman ways, and also very gifted and creative, but she's patient and loving with me in ways that I don't really deserve. But we were talking about decisions we make and with work, and I said, I picked the thing that made the least amount of money, and I stuck with it no matter what.
That's pretty much how it works.
But what made me decide is I just looked at anything else, and just didn't want to do it. I was lazy, and I was spoiled because I was encouraged by my family. Nobody really. I always got a dose of reality from my teachers. I have to say, all the way through, and I should say the name of some other teachers because I want to say these people's names. I studied also with a guy named Richard Truex here in York, and who was an excellent saxophone player and clarinet player, but his business was pianos, and he was a very good piano player, but he rebuilt pianos. He was a master technician. Emphasis on the master. And he was an extraordinary teacher that had worked and always worked. And he, even as a 13, 14-year-old kid, gave me insight into what it meant to be a working musician and think and live as a musician. Okay. And then I had a teacher named Tom Stroman, who lives in Lebanon. He has been part of a long-running musical group called Third String. But Tom is a multi-instrumentalist, a woodwind player, and extraordinary musician, and virtuoso really on a number of instruments. But he was my teacher, and he probably wasn't but 10 years older than me. Whereas my other teachers were 15, 20, 30 years older than me. And he really set an extraordinarily high standard. And he also talked to me about work and the kinds of compromises you have to make, and also the economic part of it, and being willing to do more than just one or two things, which, I think for him it was a kick, because he had so many skills. It was a kick for him to do different kinds of things. Yeah. And those people gave me little insights, little glimpses into what it would be to do it. And then I was just, lazy about finding other work and really kind of stubborn. And I got encouragement. No one really tried to talk me out of it. I tried to talk myself out of it. And I got encouraged. And now I'm in a position where I look at young people, some of whom are making the same decisions for what their own personal reasons. And, I see the same. I identify with the indecision that they feel and the fear that they feel, and also the fact that they're not choosing other things, and they're doing what they need to survive, but music is the main course, And so you're talking about organizing your life, and putting the pieces in place so that you can play. And I watch them making those choices, and it reminds me of the fear that I felt at the time, and the indecision that I felt at the time, and yet I just felt very like, I'm going to do this no matter what. All I try to do is, I'm really living like very much in the shadow and just trying to reflect. I'm trying to reflect what I got from the teachers that I had, because I started teaching honestly because it was a way for me to pay bills. I didn't have, it's not something that because I was overflowing with joy and love and genius that I wanted to share with everybody. I didn't. But then I realized that, this is a huge opportunity for me
to pay it forward.
Yeah, exactly.
To pay back what you received.
And I can never do that, Carla. I can't pay back the teachers that I had. I could live 500 years and I couldn't pay back my teachers. What I know for sure is that music has, for a long time for me, been a vehicle where I could have an emotional expression that I denied or edited out of other parts of my life, like speaking. Like using words, and as a result, it had its healthy aspects, it had its unhealthy aspects. So I have to integrate more. So in some ways, I'm more out of touch with that now because I'm trying to get that in other aspects of my life. But music is, as a form of expression, it's also a touchstone. Just like I said, that piece on that Coma tune was an emotional touchstone for me. For me, music as a whole is an emotional touchstone.
As a place where you can go to experience the emotion, or when you have an emotion you want to release, or you want to just find a reference point for it and make it understandable and dealable for you, you would refer to it in the music, but now with this sense of spiritual rediscovery, you're working on communicating those same emotions through other vehicles.
I'm so glad
not
you
just
said it that
musically.
way, Carla, because you said it. I was meandering over here, and you
That's what it is.
you put it right. But so that's, many things remain to be seen with that.
The journey continues.
Yeah, and so we'll see.
I'm excited for you.
Well, okay.
He's like, we'll see, we'll see. I don't know how excited I am, but we'll see.
No, it's good. I'm just very lucky to have had the opportunities I have, and I'll try to be worthy of them. That's what I want to say. I'll try to be worthy.
Well, my name is Steve Mishi. This is the double bass. It's also called, it's a bass violin, really. It's sometimes called the doghouse. And I'm a jazz bassist, and I play around Central PA, a little bit in Philadelphia, and occasionally outside of Pennsylvania, but not very often. I did years ago, but once I had kids, I didn't want to be driving that far away from home. I started playing when I was 9 years old. I started playing trombone, and I would at that time I would listen to Chicago and a lot of whatever big band, like my brother was involved in a lot of big bands. And I kind of worshipped my brother a little bit. He was 6 years older than me, and he was, even by the time he was in high school, his soloing in jazz was extremely pure. There was no flashiness or showiness. It was always the very musical and pure, coming from a very pure place. And that, I loved that, so I was very influenced by that, and I wanted to do that on trombone, and I did for a few years. But even as like around 10, I remember listening to Chicago a lot. That was my favorite group. And I always had the bass turned up, and I always listened to the bass more than anything else. And when I got to 9th grade, I bought myself a little micro Moog, which I played in the pep band, but I played bass lines almost exclusively because we didn't have a bass player. And then a few years later, there was a keyboard player there, and he wanted a micro Moog, and I decided I wanted an electric bass, so he gave me his electric bass. And then when I was 21, I was still playing electric bass, and I had started working, but I was being told that there weren't many double bassists around anymore, and I'd work more on double bass. So I bought myself a double bass, and about 6 months later I started working, and I fell in love with the double bass. It just felt right to me, and the electric bass became something that I didn't love enough to maintain both instruments, because it takes a lot to maintain each one of them to the level that I'd like to be able to play, which I can't yet, but I couldn't do both well, and so I decided to stay with the one that I really loved mostly. Well, this single instrument, and there are guys that play double bass and electric bass equally well. I didn't, because I didn't love both instruments. I love this bass. But there's a lot of physicality involved in the fingers, and when I was much younger, I could go about 3 or 4 days and come back to the bass and still be at about the same level of proficiency I was at. But I'm over 50 now, and now if I lay off for more than a day, I feel it immediately. So I should practice every day. But it's nice if I can get in 2 hours. And honestly, with my family and everything, the consistency of practice is, if I can pick it up and play for a half hour every day, I'm pretty happy about that. Getting into a routine of 2 hours a day happens in the winter when I'm not working so much, or when there's not as many things to go do with my family. Well, my brother and my sister both played in the band, and my dad, I don't know their history real well, but my dad apparently played not a trumpet, but a valveless trumpet. What's that called? A bugle. And I think he played a bass drum maybe in high school or something like that. And he kind of became the guy that took care of his family and didn't really... you could see that his foot was tapping all the time, and he had rhythmic ability, but he didn't have time to do it. In his day, he had to work, you know. And my mom was a singer. She and another friend of hers used to go out to different churches and do duets a lot. All I do is play. I have one student right now. I've never pursued teaching that much. So all I do is play. But to be a musician who just plays, especially almost exclusively jazz in this central Pennsylvania area, I'm working about as much as anybody can, I think. That's not to pat myself on the back. That's just saying that that's how hard it is I work an average of 4 nights a week throughout the year. And some weeks there might be 8 jobs, and other weeks there might be 1 or 2 jobs in like the winter months. So I'm working about as much as a jazz musician can in central Pennsylvania. My dad was a bricklayer, and I considered doing that for a while. In fact, I did do that for 3 years while I was in high school in the summer, and 3 years after I was out of school, I worked with him. But then the jobs started coming in, the gigs, and I couldn't do both because of the energy and the time. In those days, most of the jobs were till at least 1 o'clock in the morning, and work started at 7 o'clock in the morning, so I really couldn't do both very well. So I was asking off frequently, and there came a point where it just didn't make sense for me to do both anymore. And I did love playing jazz so much that was what I decided to do. grade, I was studying with Tom Stroman, who is another Central PA musician. And he put on an album by Jamie Aebersold, which was bass, piano, drums, and then they gave you a melody book to play along. I was playing only trombone at the time. I wasn't really a bass player. Didn't even think about being a bass player at that time. And at the end of the first song that he put on at my first lesson, I turned to him and I said, "Who was that bass player?" I mean, I didn't know what bass players were, and he said it was Rufus Reid. And as the years went by, I fell in love with the sound that Rufus had. His sound is still gorgeous. And in those days, in the 80s, most bass players used this little pickup that slipped in here in the wing slots, which muted the bridge, and it had a very nasally, I mean, you could hear the bass, but you didn't get the full resounding resonance of the bass. It was very electronic sounding. But he managed to figure out a way to get a huge, gorgeous sound, and I copied his sound for a time, and so he was a huge influence on me as a bass player. Write down all of my solos that I've ever written and give them to many people, and they could play through them with complete technical proficiency and still not be making music with it, because that's the academics and the technical side. That's not where the music is really coming from. Well, I have a website, stevemishi.com. It's a little old now. It's from 2006, and I don't have time or the will to update it, but it still looks pretty nice, and the information is still relatively updated. In Lancaster, there's the Belvedere and the Press Room. I work at each of those places maybe once every couple months. In York, there's Bistro 19, which I work there at least once a month with Tim Warfield, and now they're going to start to have other bands every Thursday night. So I will probably be there from time to time with different groups. In Harrisburg, I work with Steve Rudolph a lot, occasionally at the Hilton. And there's a couple of other places, and I can never remember the names of the places, but I do a private work with him up there. In Philly, I work with a band called the Steve Giordano Quintet, and we are working at Chris's in May, I think the second weekend in May, and that's all I can think of off the top of my head.
when silence becomes betrayal. Now the truth of these words is beyond doubt, and the human spirit cannot move without great difficulty. Against all the apathy in the surrounding world, yet we must move on. Some of us have already begun to break the silence of the night. See, as I have walked among the desperate, the rejected, and the angry young children, I have told them that problems cannot be solved with a weapon. I've tried to offer them my deepest compassion, but maintaining my conviction to change through nonviolent action. I think of them too, because it's clear to me no solution can be peaceful until some attempt is made to know these people meaningfully and hear their broken cries, because love is somehow the key that unlocks the door which leads to ultimate reality. Let us love one another, for God is love embodied perfectly. And all God's children are created equally, heirs of legacy, dignity, and worth out of one blood that made all men and women to dwell upon the face of the earth. It isn't easy to stand out for truth and justice. Sometimes it means to walk the streets with a burden that a broken heart, but before the crown we bear, there is a cross that we bear. Let's bear it. Bear it for truth, bear it for justice, and bear it for peace. Peace the legacy and determination. And not one of us in here will walk out without faith. With this faith, we will be able to heal the mountain of despair, a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to speed up the day when justice will roll down like water on a mighty slope, and righteousness shall come forth as a powerful stream. With every faith, man will sit under his own line of victory and none will afraid, because the word of the Lord has spoken, it will be. With this faith, we will speed up the day when all over the world people will be able to join hands to change. Breathe at last. Thank God Almighty. We are free at last. Child of God shall not rise up against child of God, and neighborhood shall not rise up against neighborhood, and neither shall they stand more no more. And rather than secrets and silence in the night, there can be countless voices joining together in a peaceful fight. I'm Carla Christopher, and thank you for joining us right here on the corner of Culture in Maine for another episode of York's Weekly Cultural Showcase, bringing you the very best of the art and culture scene in the York area. Now, if you like what you heard, or even if you didn't, we want to hear from you. So find us on Facebook and make sure to click like at facebook.com/Culture in Maine. Follow us on Twitter at Culture in Maine. Email us at cultureinmaine@gmail.com. Or to find all things Culture in Maine, check out our website, wrct.tv. Go to Channel 18, Show Profiles, and pick Culture in Maine. We want to also thank the artists who contributed to our set. We want to thank Hacker and Case for Change for donating the guitar. And we want to thank, of course, the fabulous artist Lovey Reinhold Price. Find her under The Glass Vidalia on Facebook or by emailing theglassvidalia@gmail.com. And John Stump of jsphotographyfinearts.com. You can also look up JS Photography Fine Arts on Facebook as well. So be safe, be good to each other, and we will absolutely see you here next week on the corner of Culture in Maine.
I'm really excited about this. I love the atmosphere. I just want to know more about it.
I see it evolving, changing, growing. I like it.
It's fleeting. Once it happens, once a song comes out, once a poem comes out, it'll never come out the same.
Some of the Culture in Maine is documenting what's going on in a way that will have that lasting staying power.
It just breeds health, growth. It's a necessity. It's a necessity, yes.